Welcome back, Dream Doers. I'm so excited each week you all show up to listen in. Today I want to talk about advocacy and business, but first, make sure to go share these podcast episodes that are your favorites with friends. Make sure you subscribe, and if you're not watching on YouTube, I would say come on over here so that you can see me as a real human instead of just listening in. So today, talking about advocacy in business, and more specifically, when it makes sense to speak up, when it doesn't, and why it feels so risky to so many of us. For a long time, business owners have been told that the safest route is to stay quiet and stay neutral. Don't touch anything that could upset people. Don't say too much. Don't let your personal beliefs leak into your professional space. And I understand why that mindset exists. When your income depends on people choosing you, it can feel reckless to say anything that might make someone walk away. Because money and stability matters, especially if you're supporting a family or carrying the weight of a lot of responsibility. I get it. So I want to be really clear that this isn't about judging people who choose to stay quiet. It's about being honest about what happens when you never let yourself speak at all. One of the biggest things I've learned from speaking up about what I believe in is that it changes who you're surrounded by. Not immediately, typically not always gently, but very clearly. You actually will lose followers. You might lose customers. You will lose customers. You might feel the number shift in a way that makes you uncomfortable. But what happens at the same time is that you start drawing in people who actually align with you, people who respect you, people who aren't asking you to shrink or stay silent to make them more comfortable. And that matters more than we're usually willing to admit. If someone supports harm or systems that go against what you believe is right, then I think it's worth asking why we're so afraid to lose them. Why we'd want to build a business that relies on people whose values don't match our own. That kind of misalignment always shows up eventually, sometimes in subtle ways, or in my own experience, oftentimes in really painful ones. I've noticed that when business owners avoid speaking up out of fear, they often attract the wrong dynamics. People who push the boundaries, who don't respect pricing time or labor, people who feel entitled. And then we're left trying to manage problems that could have been avoided if we'd been clear from the beginning about who we are and what we stand for. Sometimes losing the wrong people is actually protection, and that's typically the case. I've watched public figures say very plainly that their integrity is not for sale. They know the cost. They see the numbers and the followers change, and they continue anyway because they understand that silence isn't neutral. Silence keeps systems in place. Silence makes things easier for people who benefit from not being challenged. That doesn't mean every business needs to become political or loud or confrontational, but confrontation in relationships, no matter what kind of relationships, is inevitable. So we want to focus on getting equipped with the tools to confront those hard things in a healthy way. That's productive. Advocacy isn't about attacking people or turning your platform into a battleground. It's about honesty. It's about not pretending to be neutral when neutrality would require you to ignore something that you genuinely believe in and that matters to you. There are people I follow who model this in a way that feels grounded and real. So let's talk about them. Jenna is one of my favorites, and she is a great example. She talks super openly about things like body image, faith, motherhood, and boundaries, and she doesn't do it in a way that feels performative. It's just part of who she is. And because of that, the people who follow her know what she values. That creates trust, even if people don't agree with her on everything. Another great example of this is Brené Brown. She's built an entire body of work around courage and vulnerability, which are not universally comfortable topics. She speaks up even when it costs approval because she understands that leadership isn't about keeping everyone happy. It's about being consistent and clear. have the courage to be disliked. That's a bold statement. And this doesn't only apply to big issues. Even something as simple as sharing a product you love can bring criticism. Think about it. People question ethics, labor practices, environmental impact. You cannot control that. No matter what you share, someone will disagree. So at some point, the question becomes less about avoiding offense and more about whether you're willing to stand behind the things that you support. If you believe something, it's worth being brave enough to say so. But this is where discernment matters. One of the super expensive lessons of my life has been ignoring my gut. Ignoring that little hesitation I felt about some people or partnerships or opportunities because on paper they looked good, or because I didn't want to rock the boat, or because I told myself I was overthinking it. And every single time, you all, I ignored that little inner knowing. It cost me more in the long run, emotionally, financially, spiritually, all of it. Discernment starts before advocacy ever goes public. It starts with being educated about who and what you're supporting. And I don't mean scrolling social media and collecting opinions disguised as facts. We live in a time where you can find thousands of confident voices saying completely opposite things, and none of that equals wisdom. Due diligence matters here. Reading beyond headlines, looking at patterns, not just moments, paying attention to how people operate when no one's watching how businesses treat employees, customers, critics, all of it. And then there's the part we don't talk about often enough, trusting your intuition. That gut feeling isn't random. It's your lived experiences, your values, your discernment trying to get your attention. And I spent so many years just hushing it in the back of my head. And when you pair that with real knowledge and research, you're no longer reacting emotionally, you're responding wisely. That's where confidence comes from. When your heart and your mind are aligned, you don't need to be loud to be clear. You don't need to defend yourself constantly. And I spent so many years trying to do that. It just doesn't work. You know why you believe what you believe. You know why you're supporting what you're supporting. And if something changes, you're grounded enough to reassess without spiraling. Leading with heart and mind together isn't weakness, it's maturity. So what I've learned is that speaking up doesn't require certainty about how everyone will respond. It just requires trust. Trust that the right people will recognize themselves in what you're saying. Trust that alignment is more important than the approval you're seeking and all of the likes. If you're watching your audience change right now, it doesn't automatically mean you're doing something wrong. It might mean you're finally being honest. It might mean you're creating space for people who actually belong in your world. Think about that. That's serious. I really believe that God uses this process to refine our circles. One that when you're in the middle of it, you don't want to be happening, but then you get through it and you realize there's purpose in your pain and there's more beauty on the other side of things. To move the people out who were never meant to stay, to bring in people who won't take advantage, won't cross lines, and won't ask us to betray ourselves to keep the relationship. That kind of alignment makes business more sustainable, not less. So if you feel pulled to speak up, pay attention to that. You don't have to say everything, like I have sometimes. You don't have to say it perfectly. Sometimes that's why we don't speak at all, because we're perfectionists. I get that. You just have to be honest. Because the businesses that last aren't built on silence. They're built on clarity and trust. I've talked about this in previous episodes. And the people meant to walk with you will find you right there. And here is where I want to pivot, especially as I think about how I want to move through 2026. Because once the right people are in your corner, everything changes, you all. And I'm getting to reap the benefits of all of that. Your business feels different. Your work feels lighter. Decisions become clearer. You spend less time explaining yourself and more time actually doing what you're here to do. It's so refreshing. Trust me. You're no longer bracing for backlash every time you open your mouth. You're surrounded by people who want to see you win, not people waiting for you to slip. And that kind of alignment is protective. emotionally, mentally, even practically, and spiritually. When the people around you lift you up the same way that you lift them, business becomes more sustainable and fulfilling. You stop feeling like you're constantly swimming upstream or defending your existence. You feel supported, seen, encouraged, and that's where your energy actually starts to matter. Pouring your advocacy and attention toward the people who align with you does more good than endlessly focusing on the ones who never will. I spent so much of my time trying to help, trying to educate. I've been a basketball referee, as I've stated before, if you've been around for a minute, and I spent so many years officiating men's adult leagues and even children's leagues. And I would spend so much of my time stopping and explaining why this is the rule because people didn't understand. And look, the people who aren't your people, they're just not going to listen anyway. So if you shift your energy to the people who want to hear and want to grow, everything's going to align differently. Complaining about people who are committed to misunderstanding you doesn't create change. Investing in people who are building alongside you does, however, and that's where the momentum comes from. I've learned this in so many areas of my life, and one of the clearest examples for me is refereeing basketball. No matter how well you do your job, you are often, and when I say often, I mean 99.9%, the most disliked person in the room. I joke all of the time that a child or a teenager or even a young adult in college can pick up a basketball and run 10 steps without dribbling. And if I call it, I'm going to get yelled at by half of the audience. It's just how it is. The person who picked up the ball and ran 10 steps without dribbling, they're also going to look at me like I'm crazy. You have to at some point build up a certain level of resilience so that you can put aside the noise that doesn't matter and focus on what does. Because I can make all the right calls in the world and still be yelled at. You can be fair, consistent, professional, and still absorb frustration that has nothing to do with you. And the question becomes, does that take away your love for the game? No. Does it take away your desire to show up for the kids and the young adults who are learning teamwork, discipline, resilience, all of the same character traits that I love? That's why I love sports so much and teamwork. Does it erase the joy of being part of something bigger than yourself, of serving your community, of doing something you genuinely love? For some people, it does. They can't handle the noise. I get it. The criticism is louder than their purpose. The negativity outweighs the joy, and eventually they step away. Not because they weren't capable, so hear that, but because they let other people's reactions decide whether they stayed. And that's such a loss. Because how many experiences do we miss out on when we quit or get quiet? You all, if I would have in my first couple years, when you're starting out, you start officiating the smaller children. At that age, the kids are learning how to play. Coaches are typically younger and they're also learning how to coach, maybe even play. And the parents typically don't know a lot of the rules quite yet. If I would have quit every time a coach got in my face and yelled at me, or every time a kid cussed me out on the court, or every time something happened, I would have missed out on some of the coolest opportunities of my life. I was the first female alongside Cheryl Paul and another female from St. Louis. In the history of Missouri, we got to be the first 3 females to officiate a high school boys Final Four game for the state of Missouri. It was such an honor and such a privilege to get to pave ways and open doors for so many other people. Had I quit years ago, I wouldn't have got to experience that. Breaking records, making history, getting to experience having my whole family go down and sit in the suite and watch as an entire college campus fills the entire gym to come watch these kids play. It was so fulfilling. So ask yourself, how many opportunities pass us by that are going to pass you by because you decided it's easier to disappear than to stay visible? Taking opportunities, even risky ones, leads to experiences we never could have planned for and we typically don't regret. Relationships we never expected, growth we couldn't have imagined from the sidelines. Advocacy works the same way. Once you're aligned with the right people, you get to advocate with them instead of against everyone else. You get to build something meaningful instead of constantly defending your right to exist. And that's where positive advocacy really lives. And I also want to say this, especially for those of us who are parents. When we have children, we have to be thoughtful about how we show up and how we advocate. I get it. You can't just pull over on the side of the road anymore and help somebody with car trouble when you have kids in the back seat. You have to really be considerate of the choices that you're making and how you're showing up for people. You just have to be more intentional. Part of leadership is considering the consequences. And now that you have children who rely on you, you can't maybe show up as much or in the way that you would have prior to having a family. Some of the consequences we're not willing to face, but the ones our kids might have to face for us if we show up without thinking could be detrimental. And that doesn't mean we stop caring or stop taking action. It just means we choose how we take action. There are seasons where showing up physically makes sense, and there are seasons where it doesn't. And there are moments where being present in certain spaces could put your family at risk or create instability that isn't necessary. So choosing a different form of advocacy in those moments isn't weakness, it's discernment. There are so many ways to advocate. Calling, writing your representatives, speaking directly to people who actually make decisions, supporting organizations doing work on the ground, using your business platform to educate, donate, or amplify voices responsibly. Voting with your dollars, teaching your children how to think critically, ask questions, and care about others. Those things matter deeply. We don't all have to show up the same way for change to happen. We understand that, right? What matters is that we don't disengage entirely out of fear or overwhelm. Advocacy doesn't require putting yourself or your family in harm's way to count. It requires intention, consistency, and courage in the spaces you're called to occupy. And modeling that kind of discernment for our kids is part of the work. Showing them that you can care deeply and still be wise, that you can stand for something and still protect what matters most. That leadership isn't reactive, it's grounded. Our kids are watching how we navigate this. They're learning what courage looks like from us, not just in big public moments, but in every single day decisions, little and big, in how we talk and what we support and where we put our time, energy, and our money. And that kind of advocacy lasts longer than a moment. It shapes the next generation. So if this message resonated with you today, please like and subscribe on all of your favorite podcast platforms. Ideally, come follow over at YouTube so that you can see me every week. I mean, who wouldn't want to see this face? And I hope that you all feel encouraged. Please let me know in the comments how you've decided to show up for things that you believe in. Until next time, Dream Doers.